In this film, we look at a model of community leadership that's just been developed over the last 3 or 4 years as an aspect of community capacity building. For people working with community groups, it would be very useful to help them to support groups to strengthen their leadership. The approach to leadership moves away from traditional theories or models of leadership, which is very much top-down, about the individual, about charismatic individuals, and instead it looks at roles in community groups. Leadership, if you Google the word leadership or leadership development, you can get about 2 million responses. It's endless. You know, there's thousands of books been written on it by highly paid academics and consultants and so on. A lot of the literature comes from the private sector or is academic in nature. And that is the first problem, because what we're talking about leadership, I think, is something quite different. We're talking about the grassroots in communities. The number of books around, or publications, guidelines or whatever, that addresses that area of leadership are very few. So let's just say we need more support in this area, and we need more research, we need more thinking about what is effective leadership at the grassroots in communities. Some of the traditional ideas about leadership is that it's a set of natural traits. You know, it's about qualities. It's like when we think of leaders we know, like Nelson Mandela or Gandhi or so on. You know, these are brilliant people who are really charismatic in their own ways. You know, these are heroes who are up there on pedestals, really. And the reaction is, well, that's not me. You know, I'm not like that. I don't have these traits. You know. So there's a few questions really to sort of throw in. And is it about the individual leader, or is it actually about leadership as a set of roles or a set of activities in communities? A lot of the literature is about the individual, especially the stuff out the private sector is about how do you climb up the ladder, sometimes climbing on people as you make progress, sometimes with a lot of values and ethics behind it as well, but it's often about the individual, whereas what we're talking about now is leadership as well as individual leaders. There are some of the assumptions you will find if you talk to people in groups and communities about leaders. You'll find this is the kind of thing that many people assume. It's about being a born leader. You know, we're just born to be leaders. This is the traditional idea in the armed forces in the 40s and the 50s, was that you put the born leader, the top man it was called, top man theory, at the top of the hierarchy, and the rest of the organisation will kind of follow on and be well led and well organised, because we've got a born leader at the top of it. About being charismatic as well, and often about being the top dog. You know, the idea is that traditionally a leader is a top dog, and it's top dog, top down. And as well, it often gets mixed in with being a good manager as well. There's a lot of management training courses say this is about management and leadership, and you go on it and it's actually all about management. It's not about leadership at all. So it all gets blurred in together. So what we're trying to do is sort of be a bit clearer about this. Here's a few of the starting assumptions on it. It's about leadership as well as leaders. We're not going to throw leaders out, we need both. The idea that leadership can be learnt. If you can learn leadership, it's more empowering, rather than it's just these great heroes who are born somehow to be different from us. But obviously we want leaders that are accountable, not just loose cannons. And it's about community action. You know, it's not just about people progressing in their own careers, it's about things happening in the community. We're not talking about formal leadership roles here. We're not talking about chairman or chairperson or secretary or treasurer. They can carry on. We're not talking about the formal roles. What we're talking about is informal roles, more like a term that I think somebody mentioned already. What did you say? Thinker, I think you said, or campaigner, team builder even. That sort of thing we want to kind of have a look at. So quick tour to the 10 roles. This was research based. The first one, pretty obvious, a bit like a chairing role, facilitator. Let's hope every group has got a good facilitator as a role, as an informal role that's being carried out. And the second one, could be representative, where somebody is on behalf of the group acting as a kind of advocate or in some way representing their views, be it on a network or a forum or in a wider partnership. It may not be the same person. It might be a different person that carries out a different leadership role. Another one is what you could call the questioner, the person who challenges things a bit in the group, who says, well, why is it our building doesn't have proper access for people using wheelchairs? Why do we meet in this room every Thursday night, which is upstairs, where people who are, got perhaps using a wheelchair can't get into our meetings? That kind of challenger, which can be very useful. I think we all need a bit of pushing on those kind of issues. So somebody who's the questioner seems a useful role. This is an interesting one of leadership builder, and it's a role about actually encouraging people to carry out the leadership roles and build it up over time so that there's some sustainability. Because what can happen in a group is that you've got somebody, perhaps they are the chairperson, who does a lot of things in the group, who carries out lots of roles and tasks and so on, and they get exhausted because they're doing everything. To actually have a role in a group about building the leadership, encouraging other people. If you've got somebody going off to be a representative, about going with them so that there's a bit of handover, a bit of shadowing, somebody who encourages all that to happen. Another one is bridge builder, which is a role of making contact with other groups. Certainly from my work in Bradford, some groups had a bridge builder. They didn't necessarily carry out any other roles, but they were just great at meeting people, establishing friendships, going to have a chat with people, drinking a lot of tea, maybe playing music with people. That was really valuable to sort of bring people together. A really essential role, I think. Another role might be campaigner, the person who will give them the chance, they'll get in there and print the leaflets and organise the meetings and so on. Kind of very practical, active role. I've met some campaigners who aren't in groups. We're talking about leaderships in groups here. They're like a lone campaigner, a kind of loose cannon. I used to know somebody who had an offset litho in their basement, and every opportunity they'd be down there printing another leaflet, but they were just on their own. Not very accountable really, and in a sense quite powerful because they could churn out thousands of leaflets and so on their own. So here's that role, but now within a group, and it is different from the other roles. Catalyst is like the ideas person who might say, hey, I visited this other community centre and they've changed their cafe into a kind of catering company. They're doing conferences now and earning a bit of money at weddings and so on. Couldn't we do the same here? Or let's go and see that drama group. They're doing something about environmental action or whatever. Somebody will introduce new ideas into a group. Hopefully help it get going as well. Another role could be team builder, the person who is actually concerned about how people are getting on. So this is a bit of the kind of group worker who's actually more interested in how people are working as a group or a team. Campaigner is much more the doer. Team builder is the person who's concerned. It's an internal role. Some of these are internal, some of these are more external. So this is a kind of internal version of the bridge builder really. It's the person who's bothered about how people are getting on, who helps create the right atmosphere and so on. I was at one tenants meeting in South Leeds, and the chairwoman started the meeting by handing out photos of her on holiday, and they were outrageous, these photos. They were really funny. And I said, and we were in stitches, just passing these photos around there. Quite embarrassing, some of them. And I said to her after, do you mind me asking, why did you do that? It was very conscious. She said, do you know, I was fed up with the agenda, fed up with the business atmosphere that we had. It's getting all stuffy and, we're stuck in a rut. I wanted to loosen up. I wanted people to have a bit of fun together. And that was just one small way of trying to do that, at the start of the meeting. So she'd very consciously done that. And I thought that it was quite a high risk thing to do. And it worked a treat. It just got us all going and talking kind of thing. So that's just a small example. This is quite a controversial one, entrepreneur. that somebody who is going to take risks, who's going to start that trading arm of a voluntary organisation or community group or whatever, who's going to actually not just listen to the bright ideas or whatever, but actually come up with, say, right, well, we've got some training materials here, we're going to produce a publication and sell it and earn a bit of money for the group. Comes back to the group, not them individually, but it's about the doers, you know, the people who will move things along. Quite an important role, increasingly an important role. Controversial when we put this in as a role. Some people said, oh, we don't want that sort of thing in our community groups, we don't do that sort of stuff, but there it is. Last one, coordinator. When it comes to the community festival, this is the person who gets out the action planning charts and helps fill the names in and organises things and makes sure the first aid kit is there and all that sort of stuff and the sandwiches are there, whatever. We need these kind of roles as well. So there's 10 roles. This research spent quite a bit of time talking to community groups and community workers about what the leadership roles appeared to be happening in practice. So it was quite, if you like, empirical, evidence-based, trying to really find out what was really happening in groups. It may be we missed some out, but equally, I think 10 is really about the maximum in terms of what we can usefully handle and use as a tool to work with groups. Because what's an interesting question is that if these sorts of things are happening in community groups, then to what extent are they happening? What is the mix of roles? Is it that we've got these roles are happening quite well, quite strongly, but all these roles aren't happening at all? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on the type of group. If you're a mental health support group that meets once a week in a community centre, you may not need an entrepreneur. You may not, well, you might need a campaigner actually. might be quite a useful thing to get into. I've been in groups that started as a support group and changed over time. So it may be the mix of roles will need to change over time. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes people get into 2 or 3 roles in a group and that's it. They just get stuck. Whereas this is a way of mapping the mix of roles over time. But also, who's doing it? I've met many a chairman or woman who are doing the whole lot and everybody else is on the edges and they are exhausted. None of this is prescriptive in the sense that there's no obligation here. There's no assumption that every group ought to be doing all 10 roles. Absolutely, that would be a big mistake. This just helps a bit of insight into what is going on and let the group decide what kind of leadership they want, what kind of spread of roles and who's carrying out which ones. And then we're getting somewhere. It's different. We're not now talking about the traits of superheroes and whether they're charismatic or not, because most of us aren't. We're not going to get very far on that one, but we are talking about things that people are doing, practical things that people are doing, and we can help each other. You know, if somebody's going off to be a representative, can I come with you to the next network meeting and see what you do? Shadow a bit, and maybe next year I'll be doing that as well. So the roles model of leadership in groups opens it up to encourage people to take risks, to learn, to take on new roles, to do things differently and maybe spread it out a bit. But as I mentioned earlier on, this is not, I suppose the word is prescriptive. You know, this is not an obligation. Any one group may do well to only have 2 or 3 leadership roles, and it may be one person is carrying out those 2 or 3 leadership roles, and that's just fine. You know, it works for that group, it works for that individual. In other cases, it may be the opposite, that actually it needs more leadership roles to work well, given their aims, what they're trying to do. They just haven't thought about that or given it enough time and attention. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning, leadership, leaders, these are taboo words. You know, people are often have such negative associations about leadership. What a shame. You know, because many other sectors are getting on with leadership development. What a shame if the community sector is throwing it out. And as I mentioned, the spread of roles or the range may change over time. If you've been a group of community activists, you'll have a certain set of roles needed. If you then actually get some funding or get to manage a community building, the roles would probably need to change. And some groups struggle with that transition and may need help to look at the new roles that they need to work on. It's not a substitute for the formal roles. We're not trying to undermine the chairperson or the treasurer or the secretary or whatever roles there are. We're not trying to do that. These are actually happening in practice and informal roles, you could call them. They're also different from team roles. People like Belbin have got a very interesting set of team roles. This is community groups. This is not work teams. This comes out of community groups, and it's specifically about leadership rather than just team roles. So it's different territory. If there is going to be an increase spread of roles, it really needs to make sure that the group are involved in that and support that, not just the leader of the group or the community worker who's sort of decided we're going to do that. You know, it needs to be done with care and support, really.
The benefits of effective community leadership to the wider community are vast. As a community education worker, it was probably one of my main roles was to identify the people within the community I was working who were great leaders. And the advantage for me working in the community is that they were there 24 hours of the day. If they took ownership, it was their projects and they would be there. They would be accountable because it was what they believed in. It was what they were trying to do for their community.
How can we use this new set of leadership roles to strengthen community groups?